welcome. Welcome to Achieving Climate Targets in the Transport Sector. Can renewables pave the way? So it's not just one sector that we're talking about today. We're actually collaborating between energy and transport and really talking about that nexus between energy and transport. So welcome everybody. My name is Lucy Anderton. I'm from the International Union of Railways, and I'll be your guide through today's event. So the transport sector is, as we know, like many sectors, not on track yet to achieve global climate or sustainability goals. And indeed, it's the fastest growing greenhouse gas emitting and energy consuming sector that we have. And if we keep on this track, we're projected to feed 40% of energy-related CO2 emissions by 2030. So we're a growing importance on the climate agenda when it comes to transport. So to achieve decarbonisation generally and our sustainability pathways, we need some drastic reductions in the emissions and energy demand, coupled with improved access to integrated land transport systems that do not depend on fossil fuels. So public transport, walking, cycling and rail freight, paired with the reduction of energy demand and the uptake of renewable energy, can support the transition towards a sustainable and low carbon transport system. And similarly, the energy sector is not decarbonising fast enough either. There's a steady uptake of renewables in the sector, and we've heard some really exciting commitments already this week about tripling renewable energy. But it really needs to accelerate and uptake the deployment of renewable energy capacity and infrastructure. And this requires real strong signals from those consuming sectors like transport. And so really having those signals around ending the reliance on fossil fuels and fossil fuel subsidies are really important to help accelerate that energy transition. So both transport and energy sectors are interdependent, and that's what we want to talk about today. They're mutually reinforcing, in fact. And when it comes to climate change mitigation, as well as it's important, but also in terms of building resilience into the system as well. So we think that when we plan together systematically, both energy and transport, we can really accelerate the transition needed in both sectors. And so approaching decarbonisation of transport through the energy lens actually creates some strategic opportunities and can multiply our economic, societal and environmental benefits. And that is why we really want to reinforce the pledge to triple renewables, and to build on that, we're calling for the doubling of the share of energy efficient and fossil-free forms of land transport by 2030. So that's a doubling of fossil-free land transport by 2030. And we also want to talk today about the systematic approaches such as circular economy, life cycle optimization and spatial planning as well, to really help in a pivotal change in adopting renewables and decarbonising the transport sector. And so by integrating concepts around recycling and remanufacturing and the reuse of batteries and long-life vehicles, we really think that this comprehensive strategy will really help accelerate change. So today this event is co-developed by a consortium of great colleagues and with Sustentar, with the International Union of Railways, the International Association of Public Transport and REN21. And together we'll explore how renewables and transport can jointly tackle our global climate goals. We're going to start with two lightning talks today. So one from a European perspective and one from an African perspective, just to set the scene on those two different geographical parts of the world and their perspectives on this. Then we're going to move into an expert panel where we'll really delve into the challenges and the opportunities around the systematic decarbonisation of transport and energy. And we'll also talk a little bit about circularity and life cycle optimization and land use spatial planning. And really we want to highlight multi-stakeholder, multi-sectoral collaboration in this conversation today. So really invite you all to get involved. It's going to be an interactive session today. So we're going to be using Slido, which I'll share the QR code with you soon. And we'll be doing both polls, and also you'll be able to submit questions to the Slido as well if you're online, for example. But we'll also have mics for you to be able to engage in the conversation here today. So please have your phones ready for those polls, and start thinking about those questions as well for our experts. So here you go. I can see you looking for your phones. We're going to launch this first question, and this is just to get us going, have a little bit of a quiz. So what is the share of renewable energy in transport, do you think? Transport, how much of transport uses renewable energy to move? So, yes, this is I'm hoping that we will see some results coming up. And I think we'll let that run while we invite our first lightning speaker then. If I could introduce to you Mr. Harold Reuters, who's Acting Deputy Director General and Director for Investment, Innovation and Sustainable Transport at DG Move at the European Commission. So welcome to the stage. Thank you.
Thank you, Lucy. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning, and very happy to be with you here at this very interesting event. The European Union has launched a Green Deal and a climate law, which have very committed itself to these goals of becoming climate neutral by 2050. In order to meet that objective, of course, we need transport emissions to be reduced by 90%. And that is a huge challenge, but it's not insurmountable if we take the right kind of action now. We need to decarbonise all of the individual transport modes through zero-emission powertrains and also low-carbon fuels. And we need a strongly improved efficiency of the transport system as a whole to deliver the full reduction that is needed. A greater role for public transport, better multimodal solutions, active mobility and a shift towards more sustainable modes of transport will play a key role here. So it is a power shift and system optimization for which also data and digitalization are key. On the power shift, in road transport, zero-emission options such as hydrogen, fuel cell and battery electric powertrains are playing an increasingly important role, thanks in particular to or increasingly also stricter CO2 emission performance standards and the Clean Vehicle Directive. Last year, almost every 10th passenger car sold in the Union was zero emission. And importantly, in the context of the discussion of today, in the first 3 quarters of 2023, every third new bus registered was electric. We also see that the trucks market is gaining momentum. Sustainable alternative fuels, such as buses powered with biomethane, can provide also important contributions, particularly when sourced from local feedstocks, closing circuits between transport and local waste processing. The revision of the Renewable Energy Directive increases strongly the ambition for renewable transport fuels, and indeed, Lucy, the pledge that was made in the beginning here of this COP28 strongly recommends and strengthens this ambition. The increasing number of zero-emission vehicles on our roads will require, of course, the fuel infrastructure that is laid out in our AFIR regulation, setting binding targets to ensure that there will be sufficient infrastructure to match the recharging and refueling needs of the increased number of zero-emission vehicles on the EU roads. This will have, of course, implication also for the grids, which will need to be managed through local strengthening and extensions, and especially through a good use of smart recharging. So this kind of interaction discussed here also today in this session between transport and energy has already become evident when it comes to electric buses and the need to plan depot and electric grid connection adaptations. Over the past years, we heard several cities note how switching to the electrified bus fleet has led to a more integrated electricity and mobility planning at the urban level. However, we also should clearly mention the challenges in this transition when looking at the buses market. The need to address the capacity of production of zero-emission buses, sometimes the long permitting times, and the planning of bus depots, and the difficulty that can arise with grid connections, or the need to address the overall higher initial purchase cost of those technologies in the time of public resource constraints. So we have to be innovative in this context. There will be a brunt of investment to come from the private sector, and we need to think how we can best motivate and empower the private investment into transport. This is why we provide risk-bearing capacity with the InvestEU Guarantee Programme and with our grant programs, for instance, the Alternative Fuel Infrastructure Facility with €1.5 billion of EU reserved to the support of blending grants with loans, for instance, for high-power electric recharging and refueling, for recharging and hydrogen stations for both light and heavy-duty vehicles, for private and public transport. And our experience with CEF shows that this form of innovative blending works, even if it requires some greater effort up front. Let us also not forget that we have a recovery and resilience facility where member states have allocated about €93 billion to transport-related investments, including projects such as the deployment of alternative fuel infrastructure and zero-emission vehicles and the strengthening of public transport. This leads back to a key element of our strategic approach. It is not sufficient to decarbonise individual transport modes, but we need to improve the overall efficiency of our transport and mobility system, in particular through a stronger role of public transport, better multimodal solutions, and a broader shift towards more sustainable transport modes, such as active mobility, rail, and waterborne transport. Over the past years, we have put in place several initiatives in this sense. So, for instance, the new urban mobility framework, including the strengthening of provisions for urban nodes and related policies, like the revision of the 10T, the action plan for rail, a recent proposal for the revision of the Combined Transport Directive. As we complete the adoption process for these elements for the Fit for 55 package, these new initiatives also represent the next important step forwards towards a fully carbon-neutral mobility system. The revision of the 10T that we are looking at right now, we hope to complete in December still, has also launched a much-needed extension of the network of urban nodes, including all major cities above 100,000 inhabitants, 430 across the European Union in total. They form an important backbone of the implementation of the 10T, and the policy innovations such as a strengthened SUMP, Sustainable Urban Mobility Plan, will help to deploy better zero-emission powered trains and renewable and low-carbon fuels and public transport as well. One important note also to still make. Because we need to look at transport as a whole, we need to make sure that the resources are deployed where they matter most. Liquid and gaseous renewable and low-carbon fuels will be crucial for the decarbonisation of aviation and maritime transport, where zero-emission solutions are not yet available. So we need to ensure that the initial demand in those sectors can be met and that the renewable and low-carbon drop-in fuels need to be used with priority in those sectors before addressing also the overall road transport vehicle fleet. The Refuel Aviation and FuelEU Maritime regulations, together with the Renewable Energy Directive, the Energy Taxation Directive and ETS, will stimulate the uptake of renewable and low-carbon fuels in those transport sectors and provide the long-term certainty required for investments in the production of sustainable biofuels and e-fuels. But one thing is clear. The coming years will be decisive for the achievement of our climate commitments. The European Green Deal's objective of becoming the first climate-neutral continent by 2050 is mobilizing all available legal, political and financial instruments at our disposal. And we have to make sure that our mobility and energy systems are up to the challenge. I hope that this panel will also bring a contribution to those two sectors coming closer together, that is what is the intention here, that we really greatly support, because the two go hand in hand alongside. And I wish you a very pleasant and fruitful discussion here today. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And now we're going straight to our second lightning talk. If I can invite you to the stage, please. And we have, here we go, Peter Kinuthia. And he is leading energy as part of the Department for Energy and Infrastructure at the African Union Commission. So welcome.
Thank you very much, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. And thank you, Harold, for that sharing that you have just done with us. Unfortunately for Africa, we don't have as much progress in the decarbonization of the transport sector and all the kind of efforts that you have shared. However, we do have some progress to report, or activities that we are doing that will get us moving in this direction. In that regard, I would like to structure my sharing into 3 key points. That's first of all, what's happening on the ground in relation to greening the transport sector. Then what is the AUC doing in the transport area, and what is the energy side doing to complement the efforts of the energy sector, of the transport sector. As I mentioned, already not much is happening on the ground on the African continent. However, there is impressive signals from different places in areas like electrification of two-wheelers, three-wheelers. There are areas of assemblies of some buses, but they are scattered efforts. They are not consolidated. They are not well structured. Some countries have progressed in developing incentives in areas of duties and levies that are encouraging the importation of electric vehicles and also construction of charging infrastructure. That is mostly as much as the greening of the transport sector in Africa is happening at the moment. The two-wheelers and the three-wheelers electrification in small steps. They are not a perfect solution. Ultimately, a perfect solution would be to transform the entire public transport sector, but there are livelihood issues related to the issues of two-wheelers and three-wheelers that cannot be wished away, and that's why, at least in this way, that some steps are being taken. Turning to my second point on what the AUC is doing with regard to the transport sector in terms of developing the sector towards greening it. The AUC's leading efforts to develop an integrated transport strategy. And this, I'm happy to say, is doing in collaboration with the EU, with the support of EU, with a lot of learning from the EU. And this strategy will include components of decarbonizing the sector, components of multimodal shift, particularly shifting most of the transport sector towards railway, which is much easier to electrify. And of course, when I come to the energy sector, we'll see that the electrification of rail will also make use of renewable energy. And then the strategy will also include component of e-mobility and the urban mobility, which includes non-motorized transport and the whole aspect of urban planning to integrate zoning, ability to use different integrated living. I think that's a term that we use in these areas. So when it comes to the energy sector, what are we doing to support the transport sector towards greening the sector? It's a well-known fact that Africa is well endowed with many energy resources, particularly renewable resources. In September, we recently completed the development of an integrated power system master plan. In developing this power system master plan, there were 3 key components that were taken into account in projecting the energy demand of the continent. One was to meet the most urgent need of the continent, which is to reach universal access. The second component was to go a step further and integrate the aspirations of Agenda 2063, which are all encompassing in terms of development and in terms of, and Agenda 2063 foresees a continent that relies more heavily on clean and renewable energy. And in these projections then, transport demand for energy was, specifically electricity, was considered. Of course, here is a challenge because availability of data, availability of information, possibility to estimate how much electricity for transport would be required is not easy and is not possibly possible at this time. So it's basically estimates of how the foreseen integration of rail within the continent is going to take place. The electricity demand for this is what could be estimated. But in terms of the road transport component of the energy needs, it was not possible with clear data. But as we subsequently make subsequent master plans, we expect that more data, more information will become possible, and it will be possible to estimate the transport needs, the electricity transport needs in the coming years. But the good news is that Africa has a lot of renewable energy resources. After making the Continental Power System Master Plan between now and 2040, it is still estimated that the solar and wind capacity that will be installed in the system, will still have 18 times more of this potential available even after meeting the demand in 2040. The estimated capacity of renewable energy within the 2040 system, we expect to grow from around 972 gigawatt hours to about, from say 263 gigawatts to 763 gigawatts out of 1,200 gigawatts. That will be 63% renewable energy. And as we continue to upgrade and review the Continental Power System Master Plan, we expect that more and more the transport sector will be integrated. Two more points, then I will conclude, is that we are also developing a strategy for green hydrogen development in the continent. The ministerial meeting I referred to in September approved a study that looked at the technical, economic, social, and political implications of developing green hydrogen in the continent, and approved for us to develop a strategy for green hydrogen development, which will look into ways of integrating green hydrogen in the transport sector, industrial sector, agriculture, in terms of fertilizer production and other aspects. So transport will be catered for in that area. At the same time, an African Green Ports Forum was established, and this looks at greening the ports within the continent. It will bring together all the ports in Africa to look at ways on how they can first enhance the efficiencies, but also move towards decarbonization of the maritime transport within the continent. And last but not least, within the aviation sector, our colleagues have a project on sustainable aviation fuels, which is taking steps towards looking into this aspect of improving the fuels in the aviation sector. So I'll leave you there, and I thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you. So I'm going to take, we do have just 4 minutes. So I'll take just a couple of questions if that's all right. So if there's any questions from the floor, we have a moving mic if there's any questions. Any questions? Yeah, we have a question here. Thank you.
Hello. Mr. Reuters.
If you stand up so that the cameras can
Sure.
see you over here. Thank you.
Thank you for your inspiring talks. Mr. Reuters, you were mentioning different incentives for the transport sector and the energy sector to decarbonize. What role do you see in mandatory sustainability reporting in this for the two sectors to decarbonize? And then also to you, Mr. Kinuthia, does sustainability reporting also play a role in your agenda for decarbonization?
Thank you for that question. In fact, I think that the legislation that has been put forward by the union is a package that I try to also describe as, how we say, comprehensive, so that there is no, let's say, gaps there. The gaps that I really see is the challenge that we have to meet. And so for me, the real issue of the next years until 2030 is, are we going to be able to reach, for instance, these 6% in alternative fuels in maritime and in aviation? Or are we going to be able to have laid out all that infrastructure that is needed? And then, of course, also the other instruments which are not directly under my responsibility, but of the colleagues of DG NR, the share of different renewables, etc., by the cut-off dates. And the way that we are going to work on those will be crucial in two aspects. Will there be sufficient, in the ramp-up phase, sufficient support available? Because I really see a gap. And I'm already a little bit worried about these initial years and get to the percentages that we need. And in the implementation of the projects as well. I see hesitation to come to financial close and then to also get started with projects. I think these are, for me, the key issues, more than reporting about it. We are really at a difficulty. I described it also yesterday in some bilateral talks, that we are all standing there knowing what we have to do from all sides at the side of the pool, and nobody dares to jump into the water. And we need to have, let's say, all the players, all of them, whether it is from the resourcing or then going into, let's say, the transport of it and then the use case of it, and the users ultimately of those alternative fuels. I mean, that is for me the crux.
Thank you very much for your question. Certainly, sustainability reporting puts the necessary pressure for compliance. Sadly, we haven't moved that far. However, we do have we have set global large targets in terms of, for instance, when the Africa Renewable Energy Initiative was launched, we have these targets of increasing renewable energy to a certain number, to 300 gigawatt and so on. But we don't have specific requirements for reporting. But these are practices that you would be willing to explore and how it would be. Of course, I imagine there would be some complexities around it, but it's an area we are willing to learn and see how it can be done.
All right. So I think we're out of town unless there's any real burning. I think we're one. Okay. If it's a quick one, yeah.
Hi, my name is Aslesha. I'm a climate lead specialist at Novozymes. I have a very quick question. What do you think is screening the transportation sector? Thank you.
This has been a question that has come up and gone. This issue of biofuels, particularly because of some of the challenges that it poses in terms of competition with the agriculture sector and so on. But also recently, as we had a session with on the discussions around the sustainable aviation fuels, there was also the issue of scale. So these are the two main challenges that this area seems to pose. I think it's possible to do at small scale, but if we are looking at transforming whole economies and country systems, we think that electrification is much faster and better route to take. And fortunately, we also have we are also endowed with the renewable energy resources to do this. But for small systems, small scale at farm gate and so forth, it's also encouraged and it can be done. Thank you.
Thank you. But also necessary transition to go to fully electric or hydrogen solutions. But I think that we even need to look beyond, because when I look at the fleets that are needed across the world, not only in the Union, but also in Africa or other countries, we need to find sometimes also what I refer to in my speech as these local solutions between waste solutions and biofuels, for instance, that we see being developed in the Union and elsewhere as well. And it is possibly also a solution on the technical side of things. I mean, availability of those type of buses, for instance, just to mention that part of the dimension. But yeah, fully concurring, Peter.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, well, thank you both for those. Really, you've got lots of common themes and lots to learn from each other, and it's really great to see you on the same platform talking about this topic. So thank you very much for your time. Let's thank the Lightning Talks. So I think we have the results of the poll, and you guys are obviously very clued up because you got it. The majority of you got it exactly right, 4.1%. So not quite as low as some of you thought. A third of you thought it was even worse than the actual reality. But as you can see in the report produced by REN 21 this year, that 4.1% of transport is from renewable energy. So there's a real opportunity and a real need to ramp up on that, and that's exactly what we're talking about today. So we're now going to, we'll open the second poll, so feel free to, we're now asking for your opinions, so there's no right or wrong answer for this one. So what really is the sort of, for you, the main reason for transport having the lowest share of renewables among sectors? What do you think is the challenge in this? So I'll let you have get connected to that. Well, I welcome our panel to the stage, if you please. So if I can ask our panelists to come and join me on the stage. We have Tatiana Gatica-Navia, who's Environment and Sustainability Manager for FA Chile. Thank you, Tatiana. First one. And we have Moritz Gut, if you could come to the stage, Moritz, who is Sustainability Manager at Siemens Mobility. Ron Benioff, Executive Director for Net Zero World Action Centre, NREL. Thank you, Ron. Anna Claudia Rosbach, I can see you're ready, from Latin America and Caribbean Director for Lincoln Institute for Land Policy. And lastly, Jad Baba, who's Knowledge and Data Lead from the transport part of REN 21. Welcome, Jad. Well, welcome everybody. We have some questions, and I'm going to take the same question for everybody. So everyone's going to talk around the same topic, and maybe even start sort of build on each other's ideas and sort of come to some interesting discussion points on this transport and energy nexus. And as you can see, we've got a combination of this panel of both energy, mobility, and land policy specialists. So it's a multi-sectoral conversation. And if I come to, as you're looking at me and right next to me here, Moritz, so I'll come to you first, and perhaps if you just introduce yourself a little bit about Siemens, and then answer my first question. And it's really about the call that we've been talking about, right? So in this build-up to COP28, we've been calling for this doubling of the share of energy efficient and fossil-free forms of land transport by 2030. So, your reflections on that? What kind of investment and support are really going to need to be able to get this kind of really, high ambition? Some of the solutions, what kind of changes need to be made, and who are the kind of key players that need to cooperate, perhaps, in this transition?
Thank you, Lucy. Happy to pick this up. Hello, everyone. My name is Moritz Gut. I'm working as a sustainability manager at Siemens Mobility. We are a manufacturer of rail in the railway sector. So that's rail vehicles, rail infrastructure, and also software solutions. And when we look at our value chain and how the sector can be decarbonized, we see the biggest part obviously in the operations phase. And you were just asking, so what does actually need to happen? Who needs to come together? And for us, it's really having what we saw in the lightning talks. We need a regulatory framework. We can see that we are already having very good incentives in certain regions of the world, but they are still very different across regions. And what we also really need is incentive and action from the market. So as a manufacturer, we are looking at our downstream emissions. We are doing our share by electrifying our portfolio to a very large extent. What we also need is driving down energy consumption. But when we really look at where are the emissions generated, even in an electrified portfolio, this is coming from the energy sector. And I think what we need in this case are stronger signals from both sides. Both sides, the transport operators, the manufacturers, but also the energy sector need to show that they want to decarbonize more quickly and thereby drive down emissions. And this can be done by setting stringent targets, for example, under the SBTi regime. So this becomes comparable and transparent.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So it's really about that sort of the knowledge, the transparency and data, and those specific targets, being really clear where we want to go. Thank you. Tatiana, if I could come to you, perspective of Chile and running railways there, please.
Yeah. Chile seeks to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. So, and its NDCs propose a strategy to reach that goal through a series of sectoral transformations, such as promoting electromobility, for example. So, in my country, more than 25% of the greenhouse gas emissions come from transportation. So, for us in EFE, the need to advance in sustainable mobility is urgent. This is a challenge that EFE makes its own and establishes a sustainability policy that commits to carbon neutrality in 2035. So that's a lot. And we initiated this road just in 2021 when one of our subsidiaries in Valparaiso changed his entire energy matrix, betting on clean energy, also opting for certification of IREC standard. This subsidiary operates with 100 renewable energy, especially wind energy. So, but this is a very significant milestone in the objective assumed by EFE of achieving and maintaining carbon neutrality by 2035. For the other subsidiaries, it will be more complex to achieve this objective because in addition to operating with electric trains, we also operate with diesel. So to change or reduce our GHG emissions, we need to change our rolling system, maybe to hydrogen or electrical or a dual mode. And we also need to increase the percentage of the electrified railway tracks. Now we have only 25% of our railways are electrified. So that's a challenge. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Tatiana.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's some exciting ambition. 2035 to
Yeah.
decarbonise FA Chile. So it's really exciting
really-
ambition, not far away, given that you're 25% electrified at the moment. So wow, but very exciting. Thank you. Ron, you've heard from a couple of mobility voices. Give us your perspective on from the energy side.
Yep, happy to, and thank you to REN 21, to Sustentar, and the other organizers for the opportunity to be here. I'll build on the comments, some similar points in terms of kind of the key areas of investment and support. So first, absolutely critical need to invest in the infrastructure, the charging stations to support electrification, along with kind of active forms of transit so that we incentivize and make it easy to promote biking and walking and other forms of mobility. Our laboratory, the National Renewable Energy Lab, has developed several tools. EVI Pro is one that we work with communities and fleet managers and cities to help figure out how to optimize investments in both that charging infrastructure and in active transport. And we've been working with Sustentar and many other organizations here through the Global Climate Action Partnership to help support that analysis of how to optimize those investments. Second, it's really important that we have a focus on removing from circulation the high mileage, highly inefficient vehicles. So putting in place cash for clunker programs and putting in place incentives and regulations to get off of our transportation systems those highly polluting vehicles. In big investments, of course, continuing in public transit and carpooling and microtransit are absolutely essential. I couldn't come from NREL and not talk about R&D. So research and development, on electric vehicle and battery technologies. Obviously, we need to continue across all of our countries to work on increased performance, and not only of the battery technologies, but of the vehicles themselves, the powertrains, and looking at biofuels and fuel cells as well. And electric trains, there was some mention of that earlier. Obviously, we don't need to just rely on a passenger electrification, but also electrifying the vehicles. And as was noted, we need to have really clear targets and metrics and hold ourselves accountable and focus on targets that are meaningful, such as passenger miles traveled rather than number of vehicles. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, if I can come to you now, please, Ana Claudia. If you can introduce yourself a little bit, talk about that, and then build on the conversation.
Sure. I am Ana Claudia Rosba. I'm the director at Lincoln Institute of Land Policy, and I'm responsible for the geography, Latin American, Caribbean. I come from Brazil originally, based in the US. I would disrupt a little bit the conversation because I want to call the attention to two aspects. First of all is information, data. You mentioned research, about the patterns of people living in informal settlements in the peripheries of the cities in the global south. I think we still have a way to go to understand, how people move within communities and between communities in a city. For example, in an informal settlement, you have informal modes of transportations. We know less about that, and they can move to renewals as well, right? Maybe they're already doing, and we don't know that, right? You spoke about walking, bikes, and so on. The conditions for example, women to walk in informal settlements are not the best ones. So there are many people who walk, actually, on a daily basis. They are already saving energy for us, but they don't have the better conditions to do that, right? So we need to work on that, like building safe sidewalks, like simple things that could improve people's life. And then the second aspect is related to public policies, also to understand more the patterns of public policies in the Global South, especially in Latin America. We have been using alternative modes, for example, cable cars. They have been very, very useful in connecting people living in slums in Colombia, in Brazil, Ecuador, Mexico. We don't talk much about that, but they make the full difference. Imagine a family, a head of household, a woman again, you know, transporting children and grocery stuff and everything to the top of a hill in Bogota or in Medellin, right? So having cable cars and understand more the costs and the subsidies and so on, it's also very important because the costs of transportation for people living in the periphery is different. Many countries are talking about now full subsidies, zero costs. So we really have to think about that, right? Mm-hmm. The relevance of that. I think I will stop for now here.
Jad, go ahead if you'd like to build on that.
Sure. First of all, I would really like to express my happiness to be in a panel, a mixed panel of energy and transport experts. I think it's a very positive sign that we are organizing events that look at these nexus topics. It wasn't the case a few years ago, and for REN21, it is these kinds of conversations that we need to have, nexus conversation and multi-stakeholder conversations between different actors. So this is my first gratitude to be here. So in REN21, we try to look at transport from different angles, from the policy, from the investment, and to understand market and industry. And to put things a little bit into perspective, we saw in the poll only 4% of transport is powered by renewables. And to put it even more into perspective, only less than 1% is renewable electricity, and most of it is biofuels. So there's a very long way that we need to work very hard towards the electrification of transport and to allow renewable electricity to enter the system at scale. And we're still not really on the right path. If we look at policies and targets, we see very few countries that are having a very ambitious transport and energy targets. We counted 5 countries that had 100% renewable energy targets and 100% ICE bans or electric vehicle targets, so very few. In the investment, we see very hard the few years ahead because of very high inflation rates and the cost of capital, especially for renewables. It will be a very big barrier, but on the market side, we see a lot of positive signs. EV penetration is increasing by 50% on a yearly basis. In some countries, 90% of new sales are EVs. This is the case of Norway. In China has like 60% of the global stock of EVs on a yearly basis. And there are very big opportunities, especially in countries that have very high penetration of renewables and very cheap renewables. I was looking at the case of Kenya, for example. They're really looking at electric mobility as an opportunity to develop more their renewable energies. So I will stop at that, and yeah, happy to continue the conversation.
Great, thank you. Okay, well, perhaps like leading on from that, I could just ask a couple of things in the next sort of round. I'll go down the table again. Firstly, like I think we're talking about how really rapid change we're talking about. So perhaps something you can say something around is there any low-hanging fruits? Is there something that is quick and easy? Well, nothing's easy, but you know, quicker. And how do we sort of accelerate action? So something around sort of acceleration and maybe if there's some low-hanging fruits. And then And then perhaps the less easy is that territorial spatial planning. So is there something that can really change in the way that we plan space and cities and the way that we live that can really help with the adoption of renewables and sustainable transport, and particularly to help in that shift, the shift towards more sustainable and equitable forms of mobility. So if I come to you first, if that's all right, Maritz.
Sure. So what can we actually do quickly and what's efficient? I think we need to look at different forms of transport and think about from an energy consumption perspective, but also from an environmental cost perspective. Where do we actually need to invest? What has the lowest negative impact? What has the highest positive impact? And there we need a much more significant shift towards rail, connected with other forms of transport. Obviously, this takes some time. We will be talking about what's necessary for spatial planning. You also asked about that. So since this still needs more time, what can we do now? I think one thing that we can do very, very quickly is talk about how we actually operate in transport. So we can, by introducing, for example, optimized drive cycle, by introducing drive assistance. This is across different boards of modes of transport. For example, in rail, we can optimize how we are accelerating and braking. When we're transporting freight, for example, this makes a huge difference. When we optimize how the grid is being used, the transport grid is being used, we avoid having to put a huge amount of freight into motion, stop it again, put it into motion again. So bringing in technology at this point in time, this can actually be a lever that has quite a significant impact on energy consumption in the short term, and which is already feasible now. So we have the technology in place. We also have systems like automated driving. We are now pioneering this, for example, with trains in Hamburg, with metros and so on. But this can also be used in other forms of transport. So obviously, in my opinion, this will have a big impact in the short term. And then we need to make sure that we reroute some of our thinking, some of our investments into those modes of transport that actively reduce environmental costs in the long term as well.
Thank you. Tatiana.
Okay. Well, in Chile, 58% of the electric installed capacity come from renewable energy. So for us in FA, it's easy to access to this type of energy. With that in context, the most effective way for us to reduce our emissions is to have renewable energy contracts. Yeah. With IREG certification, it's the ideal. But also, we are working in energy efficiency. An example of that is one of our subsidiaries implemented ISO 50001 standard energy management system. So, but also in some projects we are including the use of photovoltaic panels in our infrastructure, such as maintaining workshops, for example. And so that's something concrete that we are doing.
Thank you.
So I would start with governments. There's a number of actions that governments can take immediately. Procurement of zero-emission vehicles, raising fuel economy standards, putting in place incentives and mandats for phase out of highly inefficient vehicles, and then secondly, large corporate fleet managers are a huge driver of transportation trends, and can really move the needle in a hurry and have a tremendous amount of influence. So I think a big focus of action on working with them. Demand management, so that we align the time of day when EV charging is, so that's concurrent with renewable energy production, and we put the right incentives and controls in place, also is an action we can do that'll have a very immediate impact.
So should we go for the two questions?
Yeah.
Already?
Yeah, as you wish.
So the low-hanging fruit, in my mind, as I already mentioned, is to understand better how the patterns are already working. And I think one mechanism that we should pay attention is to have qualitative inputs from the society, because we'll not be able to get data on time. So having participatory governance mechanisms at city level to understand, how people are moving from place to place is very important, and what could be the priorities and what could be the low-hanging fruits in each place. That's for me the lowest hanging fruit ever. And then I work for the Lincoln Institute of Land Policy with my colleague Patrick here, and thank you. Sorry I didn't express my gratitude, Carolina. Land is there's no quick fix for land, right? We need to think long term. So I think we have to balance, to look at the low-hanging fruits, what we can do right now, tomorrow, but we have to look at land, because this is actually what's affecting us most in terms of emission. So if you look at the ways cities are expanding globally, so we are expanding. Solly Angel from the Columbia University, he says, the territories are expanding 50% more than the population. So we are growing more. And how we are growing. If I look to Latin America, and probably Africa is the same pattern, or Asia, I don't know about Europe much, I would highlight three things. One is you have people moving to the outskirts for a better quality of life, so lower density, right? Higher levels of incomes, gated communities, this pattern that we observe in many places, or US too, very common pattern. Then you have the self-production of housing, so people building their houses formally and informally, also low density. And then you have medium density or low density, the housing projects, because land is so expensive, we cannot build houses in well-located areas, right? So we build houses outside of the city, and we lack on combining this planning, the planning of houses, the planning of transportation, and the master plan you were talking about earlier, right? They're not connected. The climate action plans, they're also detached of all that, right? So cities are growing, so we have to look at this growth, and we have really to, for me, the backbone is the master plan and the city plan, but I'm not only talking about zoning, I'm talking about the vision for the city, the shape of the city. So what are these land policies, the land strategies behind the master plan that will stimulate, densification? Maybe it's a sin. But we have to talk about that, even in Africa, even in Asia, and so on. We have to talk about that to maximize the built environment, recycling, formal and informal settlements, and we really need to think about the housing crisis. We are living now a global housing crisis, so we need to build houses. This will have impact on emissions, this will have impact on cost of infrastructure and on transportation. So where are we going to build these houses? If we don't plan our cities to maximize the underutilized and vacant land in cities for building those houses, we are in trouble. So I'm mentioning these aspects because this is all related, to how people move in city. This is not low-hanging, this is structural. It can also help us to fund the cost that we have, because many cities, for instance, in Latin America, they're using transportation nodes to stimulate densification. This is the case of Bogota, the newest highlight of master planning in Latin America. They did like a master plan, land use plan, transportation plan, and climate action plan. So if we use that and we think about the transport nodes, what's already there, and then the plan for the future, and we plan densification there, we can use these resources, also to fund, because we are generating land value, new land value in new areas in the city. The air, we are using the air, which is public good. In São Paulo, the city I come from, we charge for the use of air. We charge. We say property is the ground, but then the air is public use. So densification is charged. So companies have to pay, and this money goes in benefit of public infrastructure, right? So we have to think about that more strategically and combine these areas and these sectors of work in order to have structural and systematic changes.
Thank you.
It's hard to follow.
Yeah.
But I can I was preparing the low-hanging fruit, but definitely echoing what Anna is saying. It's a very complex system that we live in, and integrated planning and integrated policies is a must. Like, we need to understand that the decision we're taking in our silos are affecting all the other silos, and we live in a very complex system. So it's nice to see energy and transport, but working together and maybe having these dialogues to approach some points of views, but it's not enough. As you were saying, urban planning, master planning, trade policies, industrial policies, they are all related. Like, for example, we see countries that are doing better than others in the electrification of transport or the share of renewables are linking these aspects with the industrial policies. So they are looking at the energy transition as a new economic opportunity and a chance and opportunity for economic development. So all of these are interconnected. But if we want to talk a little bit about the low-hanging fruits, I think like maybe we can also think about tackling single big energy consumers. So public transport operators is one. We see that rail is still not fully electrified. Less than 50% of rail globally is electrified, and the technology is mature. So this is one concrete low-hanging fruit. But also taxis, shared taxis, we need to mandate that they shift their technologies towards EVs. Yeah, these are like some of the ideas, but happy to continue with the discussions later.
Great, thank you. Well, so I'm going to now go to see what we've got from the result of our second poll question to see what kind of opinions we've got around here. And do I go back on there? There you go. So you can also see on the screen in front of your panel, I think. So so we put forward 4 options, and so you can see the rather popular option was really one of the big problems is subsidies for fossil fuels. That is really a challenge in terms of boosting renewable energy within the transport sector. Secondly, a piece around strategic coordination, which I think we've started to talk about some of the opportunities around that. And then, again, policy support and investment. So perhaps I'm going to ask perhaps a little bit of reflection from the panel on whether you agree with this sort of priority list. Is fossil fuel subsidies the biggest issue for you as well? And perhaps what would you have chosen and perhaps why?
Well, actually, I've chosen one of those, which is a lack of strategic coordination. We were just hearing, as the last point, we still need more electrification, for example, in rail. And I think that's actually what needs to happen. So large-scale investments are needed. For example, our portfolio is almost emission-free, so tailpipe emission-free. But we still have regions in the world where the infrastructure is missing to actually have a train under a catenary line. So we need the strategic coordination. Also thinking about, we do not only bring a rail vehicle or another form of transport to a city or to a region, but we should also think that in combination of what's actually the energy infrastructure on site or that still needs to be built. The best case where this is happening already in an included way is where we're promoting hydrogen transport, because there you need to rethink the way the energy infrastructure looks like. But we also need to do the same thing for electricity, for example. So bringing this, for example, in long-distance transport across the US, it's a really challenging thing. It's highly cost-intensive, capital-intensive. And here we need some commitments over the long term, because only then it really becomes also, it brings in the necessary benefits. So we need incentives for someone to make these investments over the long term as well.
Thank you. Tatiana?
Yeah, I think the lack of policy support for renewables. Well, in Chile, there's a very strong policy to support for renewables. So it's easier to have contracts to access for this type of energy. So now I think that's very important that the country is committed with this type of energy.
Yeah, clear. Thank you.
Yeah, I would also focus on policy support, but I would maybe broaden it to say I think the critical issue here is policy support for changing our mobility patterns and the type of vehicles that we use. You know, we have these huge externalities in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, air quality, and this terrible habit as humans to love driving in single occupancy vehicles and parking wherever we want. And unless we have very strong regulations and incentives by government, that's not going to change. I mean, I think fossil fuel subsidies go along with that and strategic coordination, but for me, the big one is really government leadership to deal with those externalities and our bad behavior.
Thank you. Claudia?
Yeah, I wouldn't say anything because at first I thought I didn't have an opinion, but now that you both spoke, I do think I have some ideas. I would go for policy too, but in the even broader sense, thinking about the society, right? Because we tend to have this conversation on an individual basis. Like I buy my car, this is solved, and so on. And how the transportation, we use public transportation because this will save the environment, but we don't think about the big picture of, you know, where I live and the implications from the place I live and how cities are growing and everything. We don't look at the big picture. And this relates to the lack of transparency, information, participatory mechanisms, and so on. So if we could expand this vision to more, you know, collective understanding of how our urbanization is actually taking place, and the process of how cities are changing and we are using our land and how we are moving. And this is very complex. It's easier to say than to do, but take away from the individual, because we are putting a lot of charge in the individuals, I think, overall. Charge, responsibility, and people feel responsible, right? Yeah. And how can we change this narrative? And this relates to the press, to all the ways we communicate about these aspects, right?
Thank you.
Yeah, I was struggling between fossil fuel subsidies and lack of strategic coordination. I chose lack of strategic coordination at the end. But yeah, we didn't speak a lot about fossil fuel subsidies. Last year was the record of fossil fuel subsidies that we've ever gave to fossil fuel companies. There are reasons for that, like the energy crisis, the high hike of prices, and yeah, government felt the need to shield their consumers. But it's usually it's an easy fix, right? And it lacks planning and vision. And I believe renewables really can solve all of these issues. Fossil fuel is a volatile market, and renewables gives you price stability and allows for long-term planning. So, it's really fossil fuel subsidies are distorting the markets, right? And it's giving mixed signals for investors, for customers, for consumers, for people, and we are still also not taxing all of the fossil fuels. Kerosene is not taxed in all of the major economies, and yeah, we're still using a lot of airplanes and to come here, but so yeah, I'll stop with that.
Great. Thank you. Well, so I'm going to now go to the audience for some questions. Is there any questions on the slider, Carolina?
Sorry. We do have one question that actually it's one of mine, but I'll read a couple. We have one that says that Mr. Rogers at the beginning mentioned being afraid to jump in the pool. So it says, does the promise of immature or like other technologies like hydrogen or battery could cause fear to jump to a much mature tech, likely for these kind of like changes that we are talking about? I don't know if anyone wants to talk about that.
I don't, at least our experience, I think, in the US and working with other countries, there are some cases where questions about what the right technology of the future will be is distorting markets or slowing investment. For example, for a while in the US, we had a lot of emphasis on hydrogen fuel cell vehicles, and other than Southern California, they're not in widespread use. And yet that led to maybe some slowing down of investment decisions and some inefficiency in decisions by corporations. But at the same time, I think people are really seeing that vehicle electrification and electrification of public transport together with scaling up renewables on the grid so that it's truly green transport is now by far the cheapest option for almost all applications. Obviously, there's some specialized applications like heavy-duty vehicles or sustainable aviation fuels. But for most of our transport needs, it's pretty clear that electrification with renewables on the grid is the way to go, along with other solutions, urban planning, active transportation, walking and biking. So at least from my perspective, I think the pathways are getting clear on what we need to do.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to jump on that one? No. Okay, I'll read the second one. So following up on that one, shifting from car or even a diesel train is a huge improvement. Should we focus more on this change rather than burdening rail with costly electrification? And I think this could go to Tatiana, but I don't know. Anyone feel free?
Well, I think the electrification for the grid, or the rail track, it's very important, and it's something it's going to move very slow. It's just we have. Just like I said, 25% of our railway, for example, it's electrified, so there's a lot of diesel using, and so no, it's one of the very big problems we have. Mm-hmm. No.
Yeah, I mean, it's you're not unusual in that. I mean, it's more than 50% in Europe that's electrified, but in the US it's less than 1% electrified. So don't feel too bad. In other words, but I think there's ways we have to get to make it more efficient, energy, cost efficient to electrify systems, and you can have discontinuous, so that you've got battery as well, and so that you perhaps don't have to electrify every kilometre, and so you can have those bi-mode to make it more efficient. So there's lots to do. Maybe you want to build on that as well?
Yes, very much so. I think there are some areas where most of the areas we will be able to electrify, and there's an enormous potential. But still, even with electrification, we need to focus a lot on energy efficiency, because looking at the energy demand we will be having over the coming decades, it's enormous. Electricity demand will be increasing by numbers that are really hard to grasp. And here, even if we are able to transfer this into renewables, we still also need to really think about how can we try to reduce energy consumption itself, to manage this huge demand for energy, for electricity especially. And that's why I think also talking about diesel vehicles, yes, we need a shift. We need mostly a shift to efficient forms of transport. And over the long term, we will need to decarbonize almost everything. So I think diesel trains in some areas, they still are valuable, but we also see coming in hydrogen trains, battery trains that can replace them. We've been hearing the example of California, and I think that's an important road to go, or rail to go down.
Thank you. Any more on Slido? No?
I
or
think
go
I
to
want
the floor?
to ask if
Yeah.
there is someone from the
I
floor.
see some questions.
My name is Laura Williamson. I work with REN21, so in full transparency, I'm a colleague of Jad's and a co-convener. It's great to have this conversation. We had the first conversation in Marrakesh, so that was what, COP22. Just 2 points building on what was raised by Anna and a colleague from UITP. We have a huge blind spot in the renewable energy sector. We were supporting SLOCAT, which is the equivalent of REN21, a multi-stakeholder sustainable transport network, on a fossil-free land pledge. And we got pushback from our members who did not see that decarbonisation includes walking and biking. So we have a lot of work to do in the renewable energy sector to figure out what's going on. The other is that we are not very good in the renewable energy sector, I would argue, about listening to our clients. There's a fantastic example in Thailand, Move Me. It's electric tuk-tuks, 6 people. It was not developed to be electric. It was developed to allow young women who are increasingly entering the workforce to get together to share transport. If you've been in many developing countries, a tuk-tuk, the 3-wheeler, you can maybe fit 2, 3 if you're really skinny and you like to, arrive really sweaty. And so his development of an electric tuk-tuk had nothing to do with decarbonisation. It had nothing to do with being clean, green. It was about meeting a need of a population that is growing. And I think we really need to flip the conversation around from the renewable side and say, what is it that our client needs and how can we meet it?
Thank you. I don't know if any of the panel wants to build on that.
No, I'm just happy.
Great. Any more from the room? Maybe if you can, I think just so that the online audience can see.
Yes,
Yeah.
I'll be quick. Also, Mariela from REN21. So I think building a little bit on what Laura was saying, it's not only a shift on how we think of our clients, but also what the sector as a sector understands are the needs in the coming years. So my question would be, and building on the question of this event, which is can renewables pave the way, what does the energy sector need to understand in order to see the need to work together with transport? Because we see that from the transport side, that's increasing, thankfully, but not so much from the energy sector. So how can we make that more visible and more evident for energy actors to support, for instance, this type of call to actions of fossil fuel-free land transport and others?
I guess I can offer, start offering an answer. So thank you for raising that question. I think it's absolutely critical that we have the energy, the power sector really working with the transport sector, and it's a huge gap in our activities. So getting utilities and system operators to be doing coordinated planning together with local governments and transport ministries so that we're really have foresight into the tremendous electricity demand and growth, and we're putting in place smart controllers for our charging infrastructure and optimizing those locations. We're planning for the scale up with renewables. We're investing in the demand management that's needed, and we're planning as well for the kind of coordination on the other solutions that relate to the broader mobility perspective. Is absolutely critical, and taking advantage of the storage that's available in the electric vehicles and other forms of electric transport, which have value, and we can monetize that value, but we have to be smart about it.
Thank you.
Just a small thing, because I was just realizing, and thank you for organizing a gender balance panel, because I was just thinking, yes, some of these perspectives, they came out because the panel and the conversation is gender balance, right? And maybe this is a missing dot, because women, they represent, you know, significant proportion of our needs. The clients are women, many of them, and if you don't have gender balance in the industries, you know, in the decision-making process of cities and so on, it will be difficult to see this perspective, yeah.
Well, it's easy when we've got great speakers like you guys, so thank you. Okay, any, yeah, we have a question?
Thank you. Really good presentation. Really enjoyed it. I'd love to hear some thoughts on infrastructure itself, the infrastructure required to enable this. A fact I've heard, I don't know if it's true or not, is that 1% of the land mass in the US is covered by roads. So it's a substantial amount of materials, especially from hard to abate sectors. What are your thoughts?
Thank you. Wow.
I don't want to speak. I mean, I'm not. In terms of infrastructure, I mean, you know, obviously one of the several forms of infrastructure investments that are needed. One, charging infrastructure. Second, the infrastructure of public transit. We need to kind of revolutionize and fully electrify, get to highly efficient public transit. But very much we also need to look at, it gets to urban planning, the infrastructure of the cities, so that we're promoting biking, we're promoting walking, we're promoting other forms of mobility. I think there's at least those three infrastructure elements that are really critical. And then the infrastructure associated with the electricity grid. We haven't spent that much time here, but we can't just electrify transport and not go to, you know, high amounts of renewables on the grid, and that requires not just the renewable project development, but grid modernization. We need to invest in advanced control rooms, we need to invest in storage, we need to invest in grid forming inverters. There's a whole set of grid modernization investments that have to happen.
And social sectors.
Yeah. Yeah.
Adding on to that, regardless of where we are investing, I think it's also really important that we have transparency and security where the investments are going. So bigger investment initiatives, funds and regulation also. We need consistency in that, because if we, across the political landscape, if we see changing opinions, that really makes it difficult, because we're talking about a long-term game here. And as a manufacturer, but also as transport operators, we need to be able to plan ahead to make the right decisions. Which technologies are we going to go for? Where are we going to implement what? And if we have a changing landscape here, if we have insecurity, changing ambitions, for example, over the years, changing focus points, that makes it more difficult, because these investments, our trains, they are running for more than 30 years. So we will now have to think about what's going to happen over the next 30 years, and that's where we need some security.
Yes, John.
No, I would just like to also build on that, like as we were seeing, like it's a huge transformation that we're going to see in the energy sector and transport. So this also brings, we need to like bring into the attention the human development that is needed also, like the capacity building, especially when we're talking about grids and grid modernization. It is really hard to balance grids with renewables, so, and even extremely harder in developing countries where access is not also grid access or energy access is not universal, and the workforce around this new system, like education and reskilling, technology transfer, all of these issues need to be taken into account to be a full and a just transition, not just a systems transition from an infrastructure point of view.
Thank you. All right. So I think as we've got only a few minutes left, we'll pull the panel to a close. So thank you so much, panel. It's been really interesting conversation. I hope we'll keep talking, and I think we're obviously got a lot to help to support each other in this conversation. I've heard some real themes about reporting data, really understanding how people move, and there's so many gaps, I think, in really our knowledge in both informal and formal transport. In fact, especially perhaps how women move in a different way that men move, for example. And we've heard about some real easy the technology that's proven and can really decarbonise the way that we move, and we just need that investment and the policy support to really accelerate and really be clear on where we're going and the targets to go for on that. And really that sort of human and land space and infrastructure that we were talking about there, about how do we really use the strategic planning of transport to actually change land form, urban form, make it an efficient use of our land, as well as planning in energy, renewable transformation all at the same time. So all we need to do is everything all together, so it's easy. And I think if we just to close, we talked a lot today about this call to double the share of energy efficient and fossil-free forms of land transport by 2030. Here's the QR code. Please do get involved in and support this double. We've heard a few countries are signing up to it already. Chile have already signed this week, and so and there's a few more countries that are getting close to signing, we hope. So please give your support to that pledge. And thank you so much on behalf of REN21, Sacentar, UITP and UIC. And thank you again, panel.